It began, as these things often do, with a single sentence from a child that should have meant nothing. "Mommy, why did Daddy say you're going to disappear soon?" Eleanor Walsh froze, her hand midair, still holding the breakfast plate she was setting on the counter. The sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows of their San Francisco townhouse, warming the granite surfaces, dancing across the stainless steel appliances. But her blood ran cold. Mila, her 10-year-old daughter, sat at the kitchen island, swinging her legs, munching on a slice of toast with casual innocence. Asher, her 6-year-old, was already nose-deep in a dinosaur coloring book. To them, it was just another Thursday. But for Eleanor, something cracked, disappearing. That word clung to the air like the smoke before a fire. Not dying, not leaving. Disappearing. There are moments in every woman's life when the world shifts under her feet, and everything she thought she knew tilts out of frame. This was hers. Not when she'd found a stray lipstick stain on Graham's collar 2 months ago. Not when he started taking weekend strategy retreats without her. Not even when he suddenly changed the passwords on their shared financial accounts. No. This was different. This was chilling in a way she couldn't explain. She stared at Mila. "When did Daddy say that?" Mila shrugged, unconcerned. "Last night, when I was pretending to be asleep on the couch. He was on the phone. He said, 'Once she disappears, everything will be simple.'" Then he laughed. Her daughter giggled at the memory. Eleanor's chest tightened. Graham had always been charming, suave. People said he could sell sand in a desert and make you thank him for it. But beneath the expensive suits, behind the philanthropic smiles he wore at green energy galas, there was something darker, something she'd ignored for too long. That was the morning Eleanor Walsh knew her life was a house on fire. She just hadn't smelled the smoke until now. And that's when the story begins. Before you dive deeper into what happens next, into betrayal, secrets, and a kind of revenge unlike anything you've ever heard, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to create more stories that go deeper, hit harder, and stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Now, let's go back. Back to when Eleanor still believed she was safe. Graham Walsh was the man every woman was supposed to dream of. Tall, disarmingly handsome, with a laugh that could soften any edge. He had built his green tech startup, Solvira, from the ground up. In just 7 years, it had gone public and made him a minor Silicon Valley celebrity. Magazines hailed him as a visionary, a disruptor, even a climate savior. To outsiders, Eleanor and Graham were a power couple. She was a renowned architect, known for designing earthquake-resistant structures that married form and function with poetic brilliance. Together, they graced charity events and rooftop galas, their children impeccably dressed in boutique organic cotton. But inside their house, things were different. The cracks had started 2 years earlier, subtle at first, moments when Graham's temper snapped too quickly or his compliments felt rehearsed. Eleanor was used to structure, to things making sense, but with Graham, nothing stayed in place for long. He moved through life like a man in a rush, never quite meeting her gaze anymore, always reaching for the next deal, the next partner, the next thing. Still, she told herself it was the stress, the startup life, the kids. Anything but what her gut whispered at 2 a.m. when she stared at the ceiling in the dark. Then came the locked phone, the secretive emails. The weekends he said he was clearing his head in Carmel, but refused to answer calls. She had asked him, once, casually, if something was wrong between them. He smiled too wide. "Of course not, Elle. You're the backbone of this family. You always have been." And just like that, he went back to typing on his phone. Now, with Mila's comment echoing in her mind, Eleanor felt the foundations of her marriage fracture in a way no architectural theory could predict. That night, while the kids were asleep, she watched Graham from the bedroom doorway. He sat at his desk, the blue light of his laptop illuminating his face. He looked happy, focused. She hadn't seen him like that in years. Her mind swam with questions. What did disappear mean? Why had he changed the locks to the family cabin without telling her? Why had the monthly withdrawals from their joint account spiked in the last 90 days? Why had her own name recently been removed from their life insurance policy? No, that couldn't be. The idea was absurd. Graham may have drifted from her emotionally, but he couldn't want her dead. Right? The next morning, she called her oldest friend, Riley Quinn. They'd met at Berkeley, roommates in a tiny dorm room with peeling paint and endless ambition. While Eleanor had pursued design, Riley went into criminal justice. Now she was a decorated detective with SFPD's Major Crimes Unit. Riley didn't laugh when Eleanor told her what Mila had said. She didn't say, "You're overthinking." She just asked one question. "Do you want me to look into him?" Eleanor hesitated. It was one thing to wonder, another to know. But then she remembered the way Graham laughed. That empty, distant sound, cold as wind off the Golden Gate. "Yes," she said. "I need to know." What followed were days of quiet terror wrapped in polite smiles. Graham remained his usual self, maybe even more affectionate. He brought home flowers. He offered to pick up the kids from school. He even cooked. One night, something he hadn't done in years. It was all too perfect. Eleanor felt like a ghost in her own home, smiling on cue, answering his questions, playing the role of devoted wife while inside. She dissected every word, every glance, every subtle shift in tone. And then came Riley's call. "Elle, you need to sit down." Her voice was clipped, tense. "I've pulled his banking records, his travel logs, some of his communications." "You were right to be suspicious." Eleanor gripped her phone harder. "Tell me." "He's not just cheating. He's building an exit strategy. Offshore accounts, multiple new IDs in Panama, a pending transfer of your house deed into a shell company without your name on it." What? That's not all. He recently took out an insurance policy in his name, with you as the covered party, not the beneficiary. Eleanor's world tilted. Insurance. Her. Covered. Not protected. Targeted. Riley paused. "Elle, I think he's planning something. Something soon?" That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay awake, watching the man beside her. The man she had once loved, maybe still loved in some broken corner of her heart, and wondered just how long he had been crafting her demise. The man who held her hand in the hospital when Mila was born. The man who cried with her when they lost their first baby. The man who promised her forever. He was going to kill her. For what? Money? Freedom? Another woman? Eleanor didn't cry. She got up, poured herself a glass of wine, and opened her old sketchbook. She began drawing. Blueprints, escape routes, contingency plans. She was, after all, a builder, and now she would build her own resurrection. But first, she had to die. And now, here's a question for you. If you were in Eleanor's position, would you A. Confront Graham directly and demand the truth. Stay silent and secretly prepare your escape and revenge drop. Your answer in the comments below, A or B. The sea always had a way of lying. From the shore, it looked calm, silver blue and endless, stretching gently toward the horizon. But beneath its shimmering surface, the ocean was ruthless, cold. capable of swallowing anything whole. That was exactly how Carmel by the Sea felt. To Eleanor Walsh, as she stepped out of her car and onto the smooth gravel driveway of the coastal villa Graham had once insisted they purchase for quiet family escapes. Now, it was silent for another reason entirely. The house sat perched above the cliffs like a secret. Clean lines, expansive glass walls, a cantilevered balcony jutting toward the Pacific. She had designed part of it herself. Her name was buried in the foundation, quite literally, from a small signature she'd carved into the wet concrete years ago. She hadn't been back in over a year. It had become Graham's private retreat. A place he claimed was for deep strategy weekends, investor retreats, or mental resets. But Eleanor had come to believe it was something else entirely. Now she was here, not as a wife visiting her husband's weekend escape, but as a woman searching for the truth she had spent years ignoring. Riley Quinn had already cleared the perimeter. She waited inside, dressed down in jeans and a windbreaker, blending in as easily as ever. The moment Eleanor entered, Riley looked up from her phone with the kind of expression that said everything was worse than they thought. "Welcome to the scene of the crime," Riley muttered, tucking her phone away. Eleanor moved through the foyer slowly, like she was entering a dream she once had but couldn't quite remember. The house smelled like salt and lavender, faintly perfumed by the essential oil diffuser Graham always used. There were no signs of chaos, no mess, nothing out of place. It was pristine. That, she thought, was the most disturbing detail of all. "Did you find anything?" Eleanor asked. Riley nodded. "Plenty." The detective led her to the master bedroom. It looked the same as when Eleanor had last seen it. The same linen curtains, the same ocean-facing view, the same print of Rothko's red abstraction Graham always said brought him peace. Except now, there was a second toothbrush in the cup, on the counter, a silk scarf on the dresser, a pair of heels that weren't hers. Eleanor didn't need to ask. She already knew. "Sienna Morell," Riley confirmed, reading from a tablet. 29, financial advisor, works for a boutique, wealth management firm based in Palo Alto. Single, no criminal record, no kids. Graduated from USC. And according to hotel logs, credit card receipts, and phone tower pings, she's been meeting your husband here regularly for the past 8 months. Eleanor stood by the window. The sea glimmered below. Waves crashed against, rocks in a rhythm that mocked the stillness inside the room. "She's the one he's doing all this for?" Eleanor asked quietly. "She's not just a fling," Riley said, her voice tight. "They're planning something bigger." Eleanor turned around. "How big?" Riley hesitated. "Big enough that he created 2 new shell companies in her name. She's the listed beneficiary on 3 new offshore accounts. He's moved just over $2.1 million into one of them over the past 90 days. Eleanor blinked, barely registering the numbers. She had always known Graham was meticulous, calculated. But this was something else. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a blueprint for erasure. He wasn't trying to run from her. He was trying to remove her. There was more. In the office tucked in the back of the house, Riley showed Eleanor the hard evidence, an unlocked laptop with emails, calendar invites, a series of photos, some of them intimate, others strategic. One image made Eleanor feel physically ill. Graham and Sienna reviewing what looked like blueprints. Her blueprints. She took a step, closer. Zoom in. Riley did. The plans weren't for a house, they were for an escape tunnel. "Where did he get those?" Eleanor breathed. "You designed them," Riley said. "Back when you were still pitching that women's shelter project, on the coast. Looks like he found your original drafts, repurposed them. Except instead of sheltering women, he's using it as a getaway route. There's already construction underway on private land near Big Sur." Eleanor's mind reeled. How long had he been doing this? How many layers of his life were built on lies? How much of her work, her mind, her heart. Had he quietly turned into his weapon? Still, Eleanor didn't cry. Instead, she asked, "What else?" Riley opened a separate file. "There's a video," she said carefully. "Security footage. You need to see it." Eleanor followed her to the media room. Riley hit play. The screen flickered to life with silent night vision footage from inside the Carmel house. There they were, Graham and Sienna. She was laughing, wrapped in one of Eleanor's robes. Graham poured wine, grinning, cocky and relaxed in a way he hadn't been around Eleanor in years. The conversation didn't have sound, but then Riley clicked another file. "I extracted the audio from a phone backup he didn't wipe." Suddenly voices filled the room. "Once it's done, we'll be clear," Graham was saying. "And the kids?" Sienna asked. "They'll be fine. She'll never see it coming." "God, Graham," she giggled. "It's so cold." She made it easy. She's obsessed with control. She'll never suspect a thing. It's poetic in a way. She builds structures. I dismantle them. He kissed her. They laughed. Eleanor said nothing. She stood still, watching the man she once believed in reveal his truest self. She didn't rage. She didn't scream. Instead, a slow fire began to build in her chest, not wild and reckless, but contained, controlled, like the pilot light of a furnace waiting to be lit. She turned to Riley. "I need to know everything. I want to know how much he's moved, how he's doing it, who's helping him. If she's involved financially, legally, or just emotionally, and I need to know what he's planning." Riley nodded. "Already started. But you're going to need help beyond what I can offer." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "There's someone," Riley said. "Name's Philip Dane, former NSA. Now freelances in cyber forensics. He's quiet, discreet, and if anyone can trace the rest of Graham's digital life, it's him. Get him." That night, Eleanor drove back to San Francisco, alone. The city glittered in the distance like a promise, or a trap. When she stepped into their house, it smelled of fresh eucalyptus. Graham had beaten her home. He was in the kitchen, making tea, humming a Sinatra tune. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, smiling. "How was your day?" She smiled back. "Eventful." And then, as if nothing had changed, she kissed him on the cheek and walked upstairs to tuck their children into bed. As she watched Mila and Asher sleep, Eleanor understood something profound. Survival didn't begin when the danger arrived. It began the moment you decided to stop pretending. She wasn't just going to survive Graham. She was going to bury him, quietly, strategically, piece by piece. The glass walls he had built around their marriage would become the very mirrors that reflected his downfall. And Eleanor would be the one standing when they shattered, because now, she wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was the architect of his reckoning, and she was just getting started. The air in Sonoma was too still for a spring. Evening, the vineyard stretched out across the valley in lines too perfect, too calm, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Eleanor Walsh stood at the edge of the balcony at the family's vacation home, the glass of white wine untouched in her hand, her gaze fixed on the hills. Below her, the children were asleep, Mila curled into her favorite blanket, Asher still holding a toy dinosaur in his small fist. This place used to mean something. A sanctuary from the chaos of the city. A reward for all the years of work. It was the house Graham had purchased to escape the pressure, the one they agreed would one day become their retirement dream. Now it was a coffin waiting for its nail. Eleanor had spent the past week weaving a web of silence. Each day she smiled. Each night she planned. She listened to Graham's voice, its tone too smooth, too even, as he explained why he couldn't make the family trip until morning. There were last-minute calls with investors, a board, meeting that had to be rescheduled. The excuses came as easily to him as breathing. He had no idea she knew. No idea that she had already walked through the walls of this house and found the cracks. It was Philip Dane who confirmed it. 3 days ago, he'd sent her a message so encrypted it took Riley's system half an hour to decode. Attached were schematics, security overrides, heat sensor logs. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Someone had accessed the home's internal gas system remotely. The override code had been uploaded 2 nights prior by Graham's laptop. The signature was subtle, elegant, and fatal. The plan was clear. She and the children were to arrive first. Graham, conveniently out of town, would join them in the morning. The security system, wired to respond to his admin-level login, would remain engaged. The gas valves, silently opened through a hidden digital relay, would flood the house overnight. Then, the house would light itself on fire. A circuit trigger here, a delayed spark there. An accident. A tragedy. A family lost in a remote fire. The tech CEO, heartbroken but blameless, would deliver a tearful eulogy, inherit the insurance, and marry Sienna Morel by the end of the fiscal year. But Graham hadn't planned on Mila talking in her sleep, or Eleanor listening. Tonight was supposed to be her end. Instead, it would be the beginning of his. Eleanor moved through the house in silence, barefoot. She'd already shut off the Wi-Fi router and switched every device to airplane mode. Graham had installed a signal jammer in the basement, in case of emergencies. And now she had disabled it herself. Every camera had been blinded, every alarm neutralized. She knelt beside Asher's bed. He stirred slightly when she touched his cheek. "Shh," she whispered. "It's time." Mila was already half awake, sitting up with wide, nervous eyes. "Is it the drill?" she whispered. Eleanor nodded. "Just like we practiced. 2 days ago, she'd told the kids it was a new game. Emergency explorer training. They had learned which hallway to take, how to crawl low, where to stay silent. Mila had taken it seriously. Asher had thought it was an adventure. Neither of them knew their father was trying to kill them. Eleanor wrapped them in coats and motioned them to follow. Through the kitchen, down the stairs, past the wine cellar. She pressed a hidden panel behind the lowest shelf, a mechanism she herself had designed when overseeing the house's foundation work. What Graham never knew was that this home had 2 exits. The second was a maintenance tunnel meant to connect to the old irrigation lines on the far side of the property. Now, it was their salvation. They crawled. The air grew colder and damper as they descended. The light of Eleanor's wrist beacon bounced off stone walls and steel. Behind them, the house above began to hiss. A low, steady release of pressure. Gas. Her chest tightened. They reached the tunnel's end, just beneath a forgotten pump house camouflaged by brush. As Eleanor helped the children up the ladder, a deep vibration rolled through the earth. A boom followed by heat. She turned in time to see flames leap into the night sky. It was not a drill anymore. She didn't look away. She watched it burn. The house, the lies, the version of herself who once believed in her marriage. Graham Walsh had just killed his wife and children, or so he thought. From the safety of the tree line, Eleanor pulled out a burner phone. The number she dialed went straight to Riley Quinn. "It's done," she said. Riley didn't ask questions. "The safe house is ready. I'll meet you at the drop point." Eleanor climbed into the hidden car she'd parked a mile away the night before, tucked behind a maintenance gate used only during harvest season. The engine was silent, the route pre-programmed. They drove through the darkness with no headlights, the vehicle's electric motor making less noise than the wind. Mila was quiet in the back seat, clutching Asher's hand. Eleanor glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "You're safe," she said softly. Mila looked up. "Are we going back to our real home?" Eleanor hesitated. "Not yet. But Daddy thinks we're gone," she said gently. And for now, that's a good thing. By the time they reached the edge of Marin County, the emergency broadcast had begun. The fire was already on the local news. Reporters spoke in hushed, tragic tones about the blaze that consumed a family vacation home. No survivors had been recovered. The heat had been too intense. The structure collapsed before responders arrived. The children slept through the headlines that declared them dead. But Eleanor didn't. She sat on the floor of the safe house, an apartment she'd purchased years ago under a shell company for privacy when she was still doing confidential design work, and stared at the screen. Graham appeared on the news within the hour, tearful, shaking. I just spoke to her yesterday, he told the camera, voice breaking. My wife, my children, my life. Eleanor watched every second. She studied the angle of his shoulders, the breath control in his pauses, the tear he let fall at just the right moment. It was flawless. He was mourning a wife he had already buried in his mind, and he had no idea she was watching. The next morning, Philip Dane arrived. He brought data. I scraped his cloud backup, he said, dropping a hard drive on the table. He's already starting the narrative. Insurance claims, public sympathy, planning the next phase with Sienna. He thinks it's over, Eleanor said. Philip nodded. That's exactly when people get sloppy. Riley joined them with a printed file, records of offshore transfers, encrypted messages between Graham and Sienna, and a draft document outlining future estate plans for a new trust in the Cayman Islands. He didn't just plan this, Riley said. He rehearsed it. Eleanor sat back in the chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was clarity. There are moments in a woman's life when she stops waiting to be rescued, when she realizes the only person coming to save her is the person she used to be, before she was lied to, before she was silenced, before she was broken. That woman, the one Graham tried to kill, didn't survive. She evolved. Eleanor stood, walked over to the window, and looked out over the streets of the city that had once been her home. He took everything he could, she said. Our marriage, my career, my name. He was going to erase me like a line of code. And now? Riley asked. Eleanor turned. Now I erase him. In the heart of Seattle's Capitol Hill district, tucked inside a building that looked like it belonged to a forgotten age, Eleanor Walsh sat behind a set of blackout curtains, watching her former life unfold through a stream of screens. The apartment she now lived in was a shadow box, dark, quiet, secure. On the surface, she was someone else entirely. Her driver's license bore the name Claire Emmons. Her children were enrolled under pseudonyms in a private Montessori school, with minimal paperwork and a strict no-photo policy. Every online trace of Eleanor Walsh, Mila Walsh, and Asher Walsh had been methodically deleted. Graham had erased them. She had simply finished the job. But erasure, Eleanor knew, wasn't the end. It was camouflage. She hadn't come here to hide. She'd come here to hunt. The screens in front of her flickered. One showed a press conference outside Solvira's San Francisco headquarters. Graham stood at the podium in a somber gray suit, his hair just slightly disheveled, as if grief had kept him from brushing it properly. He was speaking to reporters about the devastating loss of his wife and children, offering his deepest gratitude for the outpouring of support, and confirming that the company would carry on as his family would have wanted. Beside him stood Sienna Morell, dressed in conservative black, her expression appropriately subdued. She looked every inch the supportive friend. Not a mistress, not a co-conspirator, not a woman who had stood in Eleanor's robe in her bed and planned her death. Eleanor didn't blink. She watched every breath, every twitch, every subtle tightening of Graham's jaw. He was nervous. Not about losing her, but about being caught. He thought the fire had cleansed him. He thought wrong. The expose started small. A single anonymous tip to the Seattle Journal, leaked through a burner account. The information was precise, unexplained: wire transfers, corporate tax inconsistencies, internal memos contradicting public statements. The journalist, Amira Blake, was a former investigative reporter turned freelancer. She'd been blacklisted years ago after exposing a corrupt tech acquisition deal that embarrassed several VC firms. Eleanor chose her for that very reason. Amira had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They met once, in a bookstore on a rainy afternoon. Eleanor wore a hoodie, a surgical mask, and glasses. Amira recognized her instantly, but said nothing. She simply opened her notebook and started listening. "It wasn't just about the money," Eleanor said quietly. "It was about control, about power. He didn't want to separate from me. He wanted to erase me." Over the next 2 weeks, Amira worked in silence, sifting through the data dump Eleanor had handed over. Bank records, emails, time-stamped photos, floor plans, internal Solvira reports. Every page told a different part of the story. Some showed Graham's theft, others his manipulation. But the most damning ones were emotional: his language in private messages, the cruelty woven between jokes, the way he coached Sienna to mirror his grief with just enough restraint to look noble. The story dropped on a Thursday. It wasn't a tabloid headline. It was a scalpel. The piece was titled, "The Climate King's Dirty War: Secrets Behind Solvira's Savior." It opened with a quote: "He builds his fortune on the lie that he lost everything. But the truth is, what he tried to destroy is still watching." Within 24 hours, Graham's empire started to tremble. Investors demanded explanations. Anonymous board members leaked their concerns. The IRS flagged inconsistencies in his quarterly filings. Whispers began to circulate that perhaps the tragedy wasn't as accidental as it appeared. Nothing was confirmed. No charges were filed. But the court of public opinion had opened its doors, and Eleanor had handed them the keys. Sienna Morrill vanished from public view. For 3 days, there were no sightings. Then Philip Dane pulled up hotel surveillance from Napa. Sienna, alone, checking into a luxury spa retreat under a false name. Her credit card showed charges for wine, spa treatments, and a new set of burner phones. "She's trying to figure out if he'll sell her out," Philip told Eleanor, sipping coffee in the dim light of the safe house kitchen. "He will," Eleanor said. "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do." A week later, another envelope arrived on Sienna's desk at the spa. No return address. Inside were 3 photographs, one of Graham shaking hands with a woman from the Cayman's branch of BMC Capital, another of him kissing a third woman in a restaurant in Santa Monica, and the last, a picture of Eleanor, taken the day before, holding Mila's hand, both very much alive. Sienna checked out of the spa an hour later. She called Graham's private number. He didn't answer. Instead, he called a fixer. That call was intercepted, too. Philip's voice was calm as he played it for Eleanor later that night. "Need her found. If she's alive, if she's coming for me, I want it stopped now." "You're sure it's her?" "I saw the photo. It's not a deep fake. And what about Sienna? She's a liability." Eleanor paused the audio. She let silence stretch out between them. Then she said, "Good. Let them eat each other." Seattle turned gray in the way only Pacific Northwest cities can, rain drifting in sheets, the sky the color of dull metal. Eleanor found comfort in its melancholy. It mirrored her own transformation. She wasn't angry anymore. Rage had given way to purpose. She no longer wanted revenge as catharsis. She wanted precision, results, closure. That came when Philip tracked Sienna's next move. She had reached out to the Colmar Group, a boutique crisis PR firm known for scrubbing reputations and manipulating narratives. They had advised her to come clean. "They're telling her to flip. Philip said. She won't, Eleanor replied. She might if she's scared enough. Eleanor considered this. Then she turned to her daughter, who was drawing quietly in the corner. Mila, she said, can you bring me your drawing of the cabin? Mila ran over with a rough sketch, a child's memory of the Sonoma house, flames, trees, a figure holding 2 children. Eleanor stared at it for a moment. Then she scanned it. The next day, a digital version of that drawing, untitled, unsigned, arrived in Sienna's inbox. Subject line, "You didn't kill us." Beneath the image, a message. "Tell the truth, or I will. Sienna." Went to the FBI the following morning. The walls around Graham began to collapse. Federal agents launched a preliminary inquiry into Solvira's financials. The press found video of Sienna and Graham together prior to the fire. His lawyers issued a statement calling it a personal tragedy being weaponized for clicks. But no one was listening. Everyone was watching. Eleanor watched from her apartment, in Seattle, as the man who once held her heart now held a press conference to deny the very life they had built. He called her unstable. He said she was delusional. And in that moment, Eleanor smiled. Because he had just admitted something the world hadn't confirmed yet, that she was alive. It was a fatal slip. Riley called that night, her voice alive with electricity. The FBI is launching a formal investigation. Sienna's testimony is enough to start. Good, Eleanor said. You could come in now. Make a statement. Clear your name. Not yet. Why? Because he still thinks he has options. And Graham Walsh was most dangerous when he still believed he could win. But now, the woman who watched from the ashes was ready to burn everything down. On her terms. The ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco shimmered under golden chandeliers. The evening had been planned to perfection. Down to the last flute of champagne, the placement of each silver fork, and the curated guest list of donors, influencers, and board members. It was being sold as a private celebration of life and legacy, in honor of the late Eleanor Walsh and her children. But it wasn't about grief. It was about image. Graham Walsh was launching a new philanthropic initiative in their name, one he claimed would fund sustainability projects across the globe. What the crowd didn't know was that this event marked something entirely different. It was the last time Graham Walsh would stand in front of people who still believed him. Outside the hotel, the night air hung heavy with tension. Hidden inside a surveillance van half a block away, Riley Quinn monitored the feed from every camera Eleanor had installed earlier that afternoon, each one disguised as part of the venue's decor. One in the floral arrangement by the stage. Another behind the speaker podium. One more inside the chandelier itself. The system streamed directly to Philip Dane's secure laptop, where he waited beside Eleanor in a car parked beneath the rooftop valet entrance. She wore black. Simple. Elegant. Understated. Her hair pinned back. Her makeup minimal. She looked nothing like the woman the world believed had died in a fire. And yet, she looked more like herself than she had in years. Inside the ballroom, Graham was making his rounds, shaking hands, accepting condolences with a practiced solemnity. Sienna was absent. Her cooperation with the FBI had earned her immunity, but she'd chosen to leave the country. Her silence was now bought with freedom. Eleanor didn't need her anymore. This was about Graham now. Him and the final curtain he would never see coming. "Are we ready?" she asked. Philip nodded, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. 10 seconds. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was her wedding ring, scorched but intact, recovered from the ruins of the Sonoma house by Riley herself. She slipped it onto her finger one last time. It felt cold, heavy. Not as a symbol of love, but of promise kept. The ballroom lights dimmed just as Graham stepped onto the stage. He welcomed the audience with that same magnetic charm that once seduced rooms and contracts alike. As he began, His speech, the screens behind him flickered. At first, the audience assumed it was part of the presentation, a slideshow perhaps, a tribute. Then the feed shifted. The first image appeared. A photo of Eleanor, alive, holding Mila's hand. Gasps swept the room. Graham froze. Another image followed. A video of him and Sienna laughing in Carmel, then the blueprints for the gas system, his login credentials, his emails, the voice clip. Once it's done, we'll be clear. The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. Guests began rising from their seats, whispers crackling through the crowd like fire through dry leaves. And then came the voice. Eleanor's voice. Clear, calm, and live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eleanor Walsh. You may have heard I died in a house fire with my children. That's what my husband wanted you to believe. The room was transfixed. I trusted Graham with my life, with our children's lives. He planned to take all of it for himself. But he failed. And I am here to tell you, failure is the one thing he cannot recover from. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. Eleanor walked in, alone, alive. The crowd parted like a sea around her. Phones rose, cameras flashed, faces turned pale. Someone near the back dropped a champagne glass. Its shatter echoed across the silence. Graham didn't move. He stood at the podium, jaw slack, his world unraveling in real time. Eleanor met his eyes. He took a step forward. Her gaze hardened. Don't. Security guards flanked the room. 2 federal agents entered quietly from the side doors. Riley, dressed in a dark blazer, stood behind them, her badge out. You're under investigation for attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice, one agent announced, stepping toward Graham. Graham's eyes flicked to Eleanor, as if still searching for a way out, as if somehow she might still save him. She turned away. As he was led off the stage, his silence said more than any plea could. The press exploded. Within an hour, the footage was viral. The woman presumed dead was not only alive, but had orchestrated her own resurrection with the precision of a tactician and the fury of a mother. Interviews poured in. Offers. Sympathy. Apologies. Eleanor refused them all. She didn't need their redemption. She had already claimed her own. Weeks passed. The children adapted quickly. Their new school welcomed them back with quiet understanding. Mila, once timid and anxious, now walked taller. Asher, unaware of the full scope of what had occurred, still talked about their secret tunnel mission as if it were a game. Eleanor let him believe it for now. She resumed work at her architecture firm, first under her assumed identity, then slowly transitioning back. The world no longer looked at her as a victim. They looked at her as a force. She used her settlement, money, her remaining savings, and donations from silent supporters to launch a foundation, the Ember Project. It supported women trapped in high-control, high-risk relationships, teaching them not only how to leave, but how to rebuild, strategically, legally, permanently. She spoke only once, publicly, about what had happened. At a conference for survivors, she stood before a packed auditorium and said, "I don't believe in forgiveness without accountability. I don't believe in closure when the door was burned shut by someone else. What I believe in is fire, in letting it cleanse what's dead and fertilize what's next. You are not weak for surviving. You are unstoppable for choosing to return." The applause was quiet at first, then it roared. Later that night, as the lights dimmed in her home and the children slept upstairs, Eleanor stood at the window of her new house, a small, modern structure she had designed herself. Every inch of it was hers, every corner secure, every choice intentional. She no longer feared glass walls. she used them to reflect. Riley visited often. Philip sent updates when needed. Amira's article had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. The people who had tried to bury Eleanor were now studying her methods in legal journals and security seminars. One evening, as she tucked Mila into bed, her daughter asked, "Will he ever come back?" Eleanor looked into her eyes. "No," she said gently. "But we will." She kissed her daughter's forehead, then turned off the light. In the quiet that followed, she wrote the final line of the letter she had begun months ago, a letter she planned to give her children when they were old enough to understand everything. Survival is not a passive act. It is a choice made over and over, in silence and fire. You come back not as who you were, but as who you were always, meant to become. Eleanor Walsh's story wasn't about fire, not really. It was about choice. About a woman who had every reason to break, but instead chose to rebuild herself from ash and silence, to transform pain into power, and to use the very tools designed to destroy her as instruments of justice. She began as many do, accomplished, intelligent, loyal to her family and her marriage. Her world was polished on the surface. A thriving career, 2 bright children, a charismatic husband with dreams of saving the planet. From the outside, her life was ideal. But beneath the surface, Graham Walsh had been building something else entirely. Lies, affairs, financial betrayal, and eventually, the ultimate violation, a plot to erase her and their children through a staged accident. His goal wasn't just freedom or love, it was domination, control, the complete dismantling of Eleanor's identity, life, and legacy. What Graham didn't understand was that Eleanor wasn't just a wife or a mother. She was an architect, not just of buildings, but of strategy. She didn't fight back with screams or vengeance born of impulse. She planned, she studied, she waited, and then she rose. Her journey from victim to avenger wasn't a straight path. It demanded loss, displacement, fear. It required her to fake her own death, uproot her children, live in the shadows while the world mourned her, and then to return, not to reclaim the past, but to expose the truth and build a future no one could take from her. Eleanor didn't seek revenge for spectacle. She sought justice for survival. She exposed Graham not through chaos, but precision. She dismantled his empire in silence while he smiled for cameras. She turned every betrayal into leverage, every tear into data, every piece of evidence into a weapon. In the end, she didn't need to scream. She only needed to appear, alive, resolute, and untouchable. And in doing so, she didn't just destroy her enemies, she redefined what it means to survive betrayal. Her story teaches us something critical in today's world. Resilience is not passive. It's not about bouncing back with a smile. It's about sitting with the truth of what has been lost and choosing, deliberately, to rise anyway. It's about knowing that healing is not always soft, and justice is not always gentle. Sometimes, strength looks like quiet planning, like waking up and choosing not to collapse, like loving your children enough to burn your life down to protect theirs. In Eleanor's case, her silence was never weakness. It was preparation. So what's the lesson? We all face betrayal. Maybe not in the form of an attempted murder or a multi-million-dollar conspiracy, but in the form of lies, abandonment, manipulation, and heartbreak. We are all at some point left with ashes, of trust, of identity, of dreams. But we are also given a choice. We can let those ashes bury us, or we can rise from them. Eleanor's story is a reminder that power doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing it with unflinching clarity, from becoming your own protector when no one else will, from refusing to be erased. And practically, what does that look like for us? It means keeping documentation when something feels wrong. It means asking the hard questions, even when we fear the answers. It means refusing to silence our instincts. And most importantly, it means not letting someone else write the ending of our story before we've had a chance to live it. Maybe you're not planning an escape from a burning house, but you might be escaping a toxic relationship, a manipulative workplace, or an internal voice that tells you you're not enough. Whatever your version of the fire looks like, the lesson remains. Survival is the first step, rebirth is the second, mastery is the third. And legacy, that's what you leave behind when you rise. Now before we close, here's a question just for you. We want to hear what you would do in Eleanor's shoes. If someone betrayed you deeply, would you? A. Forgive them and move on silently. B. Confront them and hold them publicly accountable. Drop your answer in the comments below. A or B, and tell us why. We also want to know, what would you have done differently if you were Eleanor? Would you have returned at all, or stayed hidden and watched from a distance? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective. And if this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel seen, inspired, or empowered, then please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more stories that dig deeper, challenge assumptions, and remind all of us that justice doesn't always come from the system. Sometimes it comes from the fire, and sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one they thought was gone.